A new species had been detected on the far edge of the galactic map. The Galactic Council, the oldest and most powerful governing body in the known universe, convened in their towering citadel of glass and metal, high above the capital world of Oraxis Prime. The discovery of intelligent life was always met with the same procedure: classification, evaluation, and, if necessary, subjugation. This time, the species was humanity, a race confined to a single solar system, barely scratching at the edges of interstellar expansion. Their technology was crude, reliant on brute force physics rather than the elegant energy-based weaponry of the Council's fleets. Their civilization was young, fractured into nations that had warred among themselves for centuries. And yet they had accomplished something remarkable: they had survived. That alone made them interesting. But interest was not enough to earn respect. The Council reviewed their findings. Human ships were primitive, relying on solid projectile weapons instead of the far superior plasma and laser arrays wielded by the Council's armada. Their ships were small, inefficient, and slow. They had no known warp gate technology, no quantum communication networks, no planetary shields. Their only space stations were clunky, barely holding together, incapable of mounting a serious defense against a modern fleet. The decision was unanimous: humanity posed no threat. An expeditionary fleet was dispatched to Sol with a simple message: submission or eradication. The Council's emissary, a Zalari diplomat bred for negotiation, stood aboard the flagship Orithix as they reached orbit over Earth. He transmitted the standard ultimatum, a message refined over thousands of years. You stand before the Galactic Council. Your world is now under our protection. You will relinquish your weapons, surrender your governments, and submit to the laws of civilized space. This is not a negotiation. This is mercy. Refusal will be met with swift and total annihilation. Silence followed. The human response did not come from a government official, nor from a military leader. It came from a broadcast signal, hijacking the very transmission line the Council used to speak. A deep, steady voice, cold and measured, filled the command deck of the Orithix. We do not submit. We do not surrender. You come with threats, and yet you do not know war. You do not know us. You will. Then, something unexpected happened. Every Council ship in orbit suffered simultaneous system failures. Screens flickered, targeting arrays malfunctioned, engines shut down, and long-range communications were reduced to static. Humanity, a species deemed too primitive to be a concern, had just launched a cyber attack powerful enough to cripple an entire fleet. Panic rippled through the command decks of the stranded ships. Officers barked orders, engineers scrambled to reboot systems, but before they could fully recover, the first human counterattack arrived. It was not a fleet. It was not a planetary defense grid. It was a storm of tungsten rods, fired from orbital platforms hidden across the system. Kinetic bombardment. Simple, devastating, unstoppable. The first rods struck the Orithix, piercing its shields as if they did not exist, slamming through its hull with the force of a meteor impact. The second wave targeted the escort destroyers, severing fuel lines, shattering reactor cores, and tearing ships in half with sheer velocity alone. What had been a formation of pristine warships moments ago was now a graveyard of drifting metal and fire. The Council fleet attempted to retaliate, but their targeting arrays were still scrambled. Energy weapons fired wildly into the void, missing entirely. The humans were not even fighting with ships. They were using the environment, the very physics of space itself, to destroy the superior fleet above them. By the time the Council's systems were restored, it was already too late. Half of their fleet was either crippled or reduced to debris. They had never experienced anything like this. Not from an inferior species. Not from a race still bound to their home system. The Council's remaining ships attempted to retreat, their hyperdrives spinning up, but before they could flee, the humans sent another transmission. Leaving so soon? A new wave of attacks followed, not physical weapons, but digital warfare. Human cyber units had already infiltrated the Council's navigation grids. The coordinates had been changed. Ships that thought they were jumping back to Council space instead found themselves hurtling into the gravity wells of Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun itself. The ones that survived the jump arrived in random, uncharted sectors, lost and helpless. Only a handful of ships managed to escape back to the Council's stronghold in Oraxis Prime. The survivors brought back more than just tales of defeat. They brought terror. The Galactic Council, in its arrogance, had assumed a swift victory. Instead, they had just suffered one of the most humiliating losses in their history. The humans had not only defied them, but they had routed them with nothing but ingenuity, physics, and ruthlessness. Panic spread among the higher ranks. Had humanity been hiding their strength? Was this a fluke? Or had the Council made a mistake far greater than they realized? There was only one way to find out. The full force of the Galactic Council's military would be sent. Not just an expeditionary fleet, but the entire war machine of the galaxy's most powerful empire. Humanity's first strike had been unexpected. Their tactics had been brutal, efficient, and merciless. But the Council still believed in their superiority. They believed that with overwhelming numbers, with their battle-hardened fleets and advanced weaponry, they would crush humanity once and for all. What they did not understand, what they could not understand, was that humans did not fight like other species. Humans did not break. They adapted. They learned. And when they bled, they became stronger. The war had just begun. And humanity? Humanity was just getting started. The Galactic Council's response was immediate. The humiliation of their first defeat could not stand. A full-scale war fleet was dispatched, composed of thousands of warships, each one a technological marvel designed for absolute dominance. The Council had crushed countless species before, and they believed humanity would be no different. The fleet was led by High Commander Zoralis, a seasoned tactician who had overseen dozens of planetary subjugations. As they entered the Sol system, they expected a swift and decisive battle. Their analysis remained unchanged. Humanity lacked the scale, the resources, the experience to face a fully mobilized interstellar military force. This was not a skirmish. This was an extinction event. The moment they crossed into human-occupied space, the battle began. But the humans did not meet them in open combat. There were no planetary defense grids firing upon their arrival, no great armadas assembled to fight head-on. Instead, their fleet found itself under attack before a single human ship was even in visual range. The first casualties were not from weapons, but from space itself. Dozens of Council ships fell into meticulously placed orbital minefields, their hulls torn apart by shrapnel moving at impossible speeds. The mines were invisible to standard sensors, hidden within the electromagnetic storms of Jupiter's upper atmosphere, disguised among the debris fields of the asteroid belt, and buried within the natural radiation belts of the system's planets. Their shields, designed to deflect energy-based weaponry, were useless against hyper-accelerated metallic projectiles. Dozens of warships, each powerful enough to reduce continents to ash, were reduced to floating wreckage before they had fired a single shot. The fleet tried to regroup, but human interference was relentless. Their navigational systems were compromised, their formations thrown into chaos. Entire battalions were led astray by false sensor readings, making them easy targets for ambushes. Every Council vessel that tried to communicate an SOS signal found their distress calls jammed or, worse, rerouted, sending them straight into human kill zones. Then came the real attack. The first human warships emerged from behind the dark side of Saturn's moons, using the gravitational pull to slingshot themselves into the Council's rear formations. They did not engage in the slow, formation-based combat the Council had perfected over millennia. They moved erratically, unpredictably, striking and vanishing before a counterattack could be organized. Instead of massive, lumbering capital ships designed for prolonged battles, human vessels were smaller, faster, and built for pure aggression. Their hulls were reinforced not for endurance, but for calculated impact. They did not engage in traditional dogfighting but instead relied on overwhelming firepower, delivering devastating alpha strikes before repositioning. They used weapons the Council had dismissed as primitive: high-velocity rail guns, coil-launched tungsten slugs, and guided missile barrages. Council shields, designed to absorb plasma and laser fire, were useless against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The very technology the Council had once deemed obsolete was now tearing their warships apart. Desperation set in. Zoralis ordered a full-spread formation to minimize human ambush points, forcing them into direct engagement. It was a fatal mistake. Humanity had lured them into position. With a single command, Earth's deep space platforms came to life. Hidden railgun batteries, disguised as civilian satellites, opened fire from orbit. These weapons, some larger than battleships themselves, were designed not to disable, but to obliterate. In the span of seconds, hundreds of Council ships were shattered. Entire squadrons disappeared in flashes of fire and metal. The battlefield became a graveyard, filled with debris and burning wrecks drifting lifelessly. Survivors attempted to escape, but the humans anticipated that too. Their retreat routes had already been calculated, their jump coordinates hacked. Every ship that tried to flee ran straight into another kill zone. The true horror, however, was yet to come. Human boarding teams launched onto the surviving Council vessels, not for negotiation, not for capture, but for extermination. Human soldiers moved with precision, breaching airlocks, sweeping corridors, cutting down Council personnel with ruthless efficiency. They fought with a brutality the Council had never encountered before, no mercy, no hesitation. Every room was cleared in seconds, every survivor executed without pause. The Council soldiers, bred for wars of tactics and formation-based battles, were wholly unprepared for close-quarters combat against an enemy that thrived in chaos. They were slaughtered by soldiers who had been forged in the unending crucible of their own history, raised on wars where survival meant adapting, where every conflict had honed them into something that no other species in the galaxy could match. There was no surrender. The humans did not take prisoners. Zoralis, realizing the full scale of the disaster, gave the only order left. He called for a ceasefire. Humanity did not respond. The last of the Council's warships, its command vessel, attempted one final act of defiance, a suicide run towards Earth's surface. If they could not win, they would burn the world before retreating. The vessel accelerated, engines burning at maximum output, its massive frame locked on a collision course with the human homeworld. But as it approached, it was met with something unexpected. It was not stopped by planetary defenses or intercepted by fighter squadrons. It was halted by something far more terrifying. A single human warship moved directly into its path. Smaller, weaker, outgunned in every measurable way. But instead of firing, it accelerated. It did not move to evade. It moved to collide. A last-ditch act of defiance, one that no rational military officer would ever consider. And yet, that was exactly why it worked. The human ship struck with the force of an artificial meteor, tearing straight through the Council's command vessel. The impact split the warship in half, sending both pieces spiraling into deep space, lifeless and burning. The message was clear. This was not a war humanity was fighting to win. This was a war humanity was fighting to end. The battle was over. The Council fleet had been annihilated. What had been a force meant to wipe humanity from existence was now little more than debris scattered across the void. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, an enemy had not only survived their full-scale military retaliation, but had destroyed it completely. And as the last human transmission was broadcast across the remnants of the Council's forces, it became clear that the war was far from over. Ceasefire? Humanity was just getting started. Word of the Council's defeat spread faster than they could suppress it. What was meant to be a simple act of conquest had turned into a disaster beyond comprehension. The most powerful military force in the galaxy had been shattered, its fleets turned to debris, its commanders either dead or missing. The survivors who managed to return to Council space did so in silence, unwilling or unable to explain how a species with no interstellar empire, no warp gate access, and no advanced shielding had utterly destroyed them. Panic gripped the Council. This was not just a military failure, it was a psychological one. They had ruled for millennia through fear. Their enemies had always surrendered the moment their warships arrived. The sheer scale of their power had been enough to ensure compliance. But humanity had done something that no other species had ever done. They had not feared the Council. They had not negotiated, begged, or sought compromise. They had answered absolute power with absolute destruction. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Emergency war protocols were enacted. The Council's ruling members, many of whom had never seen battle themselves, now faced the reality of an enemy they could not intimidate. Some argued for diplomacy, believing that perhaps humanity could be reasoned with. Others rejected the notion entirely, insisting that humanity's refusal to surrender had made them an existential threat. But while the Council debated, humanity moved. The first sign came from deep space monitoring stations positioned along the outer rim of Council territory. Long-range sensors detected unusual activity, unknown ships appearing in systems once thought unreachable. At first, these reports were dismissed as anomalies. Then entire stations went dark. Patrol fleets sent to investigate never returned. The pattern was undeniable. Humanity was advancing, but they were not conquering worlds in the way the Council had expected. There were no announcements, no declarations, no attempts to integrate conquered planets into their rule. Instead, human forces struck and vanished, leaving destruction in their wake. Supply lines were severed. Communication networks collapsed. Worlds that had relied on Council protection found themselves abandoned, unable to call for reinforcements. The attacks were precise, methodical. It was not expansion. It was dismantling. A growing number of outer rim colonies fell into chaos. Civil unrest turned into rebellion as local populations realized the Council's power was not absolute. If humanity could stand against them, then why should they submit? The Council's control began to fracture, not because of direct war, but because the idea of their invincibility had been shattered. Desperate to regain order, the Council sent a fleet to one of their most secure strongholds, Valaris Prime, a fortress world known for its impenetrable defenses. The objective was simple: establish a rallying point, show the galaxy that the Council was still in control, and prove that humanity could be defeated. The fleet arrived in formation, prepared for an extended campaign. But they were already too late. Valaris Prime was gone. Not occupied. Not conquered. Gone. The entire planet, a world that had once housed billions and had stood as a symbol of the Council's dominance, was nothing more than a lifeless husk. Orbital scans revealed the horrifying truth. The humans had never intended to fight for the planet. They had simply made it uninhabitable. Massive atmospheric destabilizers had been deployed, forcing wild, uncontrollable shifts in climate. Megastorms had raged across the surface, tearing cities from their foundations. Artificial earthquakes had shattered tectonic plates, collapsing the entire planetary infrastructure. Weaponized bioagents had been introduced, not to kill, but to strip the world of its ability to sustain life. Valaris Prime had not been taken. It had been erased. The message was clear: humanity did not care about territory. They did not seek to rule. They had no interest in diplomacy or negotiations. They were not fighting for control of the galaxy. They were fighting to ensure the Council never threatened them again. Back on Auraxis Prime, fear turned to desperation. The Council's leaders, who had once viewed themselves as the supreme authority of the galaxy, now faced the reality of an enemy that fought with no regard for traditional warfare. The rules they had relied upon for generations meant nothing to humanity. Attempts to establish contact were met with silence. Messages of surrender, of offers for peace, were ignored. Humanity had made its position clear from the moment they had answered the Council's first transmission. There would be no surrender. No negotiations. No ceasefire. Time was running out. More worlds fell, not because humanity had invaded them, but because they had been left to fend for themselves. Council governors abandoned their posts, fearing execution at the hands of their own people. Military commanders defected, seeing no point in fighting a war they had already lost. Even species once loyal to the Council began considering their own survival, wondering if aligning with humanity might be their only hope. Auraxis Prime itself, the heart of the Council's power, was no longer untouchable. Humanity's reach had extended further than anyone had thought possible. Their forces had been sighted in nearby systems, moving without warning, striking without hesitation. The unthinkable had become inevitable. The war was no longer about victory. It was about survival. The Council had always believed that power was what dictated the fate of civilizations. They had believed their fleets, their armies, their technology had placed them beyond challenge. But humanity had proven that true power was something else entirely. It was not numbers, not weapons, not even fear. It was the refusal to be ruled. The end was near. The only question left was how much longer the Council could last. The Council's downfall was no longer a question of possibility but of time. Their fleets had been shattered, their dominion fractured, and their allies had either abandoned them or turned against them. What had once been an empire built on absolute power had now become a collection of scattered worlds, isolated and vulnerable. Panic spread through the highest ranks of the Council as they realized they had underestimated not just humanity's strength, but their resolve. In a final attempt to salvage control, the Council enacted the last protocol, an ancient directive never before used, meant only for the most catastrophic of scenarios. It called for the mobilization of every remaining warship, every available soldier, every weapon still in their arsenal. It was not a strategy. It was desperation. The remnants of their fleets regrouped at Auraxis Prime, forming the largest defensive force in recorded history. Every planetary shield was reinforced, every orbital station armed to the teeth, every citizen prepared for what they all knew was coming. The once glorious capital of the Council, the jewel of civilization, had become a fortress. And still, there was silence from humanity. No demands. No warnings. No ultimatums. Then, the sky changed. Their arrival was not marked by the slow approach of war fleets, nor the predictable waves of planetary bombardment. It came all at once, without prelude, without hesitation. Humanity's forces bypassed standard approaches, striking simultaneously from multiple angles, overwhelming every layer of defense in a coordinated attack that defied conventional tactics. The first losses were immediate. Council stations that had held firm for millennia were obliterated in minutes. Orbital platforms, once thought to be indestructible, crumbled under relentless kinetic bombardment. Energy shields collapsed as advanced electronic warfare neutralized power grids. Ground defenses were compromised before they could fully activate. For the first time in history, Auraxis Prime was under siege. Council forces fought with everything they had. Every warship that could still fire launched counterattacks. Every soldier that could still stand was deployed to the last barricade. They were defending not just a planet, but the last remnants of their rule. There was nowhere left to run. But humanity had not come for conquest. They had not come to occupy, to negotiate, or to claim new territory. They had come to finish what had been started. The battle that followed was not a contest of strategy, nor a display of tactical brilliance. It was annihilation. Humanity fought with precision, each strike dismantling critical infrastructure. They did not waste firepower on unnecessary targets. They did not leave survivors. Every command center was breached, every key structure turned to rubble, every warship reduced to wreckage. The once proud fleet of the Council was torn apart, its flagship detonated in the upper atmosphere for all to witness. The last standing generals fell in rapid succession, their desperate counteroffensives failing before they could even be executed. The streets of the capital, once filled with towering spires and monuments of victory, became battlegrounds of fire and destruction. And still, there was no surrender. Even as the Council's defenses crumbled, as their forces dwindled, as their world burned, no one dared to ask for mercy. They already knew the answer. The final hours of the Council were not marked by negotiation or desperate pleas. They were marked by silence, by the quiet understanding that they had brought this upon themselves. They had thought themselves untouchable, beyond consequence. They had believed their dominion was permanent, their authority absolute. But humanity had taught them the one lesson they had refused to accept. No empire lasts forever. By the time the last council stronghold fell, there was nothing left to rule. The leaders who had once dictated the fate of entire civilizations lay dead. Their great fleets, once the terror of the galaxy, were reduced to drifting metal. Their capital, the heart of their empire, had been reduced to ruins. And humanity? Humanity did not stay to celebrate. They did not raise banners, did not plant flags, did not make grand declarations of victory. They had come only for one purpose: to ensure the Council would never threaten them again. And they had succeeded. What remained of the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible became reality. The rulers of the known universe, the masters of countless worlds, had been erased in a war they had started and could never hope to win. Their own arrogance had sealed their fate. And as the last human warship left the burning husk of Oraxis Prime behind, one final message was broadcast to every remaining world still loyal to the fallen empire. There would be no occupation, no control, no replacements. The war was over. But humanity was just getting started. The war had ended, but its consequences had only begun. The collapse of the Galactic Council was not just the fall of an empire. It was the unraveling of an entire order that had ruled for millennia. What had once been a galaxy governed by strict hierarchies, unwavering control, and enforced submission had now become a void of uncertainty. The absence of their former rulers left countless worlds in chaos. Some tried to hold on to the remnants of the old ways, clinging to the shattered remains of a system that no longer existed. Others saw an opportunity to break free, to forge their own path without fear of retribution. But amidst the confusion, one fact remained undeniable. Humanity had done what no species before them had even dared to attempt. They had defied the greatest power in the known galaxy, and won. The surviving factions of the former council watched humanity with wary anticipation, uncertain of what would come next. Would they establish a new empire in place of the one they had destroyed? Would they enforce their own rule over the countless civilizations now left without leadership? Would they demand tribute, resources, or servitude? These were the questions whispered in every dark corner of the galaxy. But humanity made no such claims. They took no thrones, demanded no oaths, claimed no planets as their own. The worlds they had dismantled remained untouched, left to their own fate. The territories once ruled with an iron grip were given no new overlords. Where other conquerors would have rushed to seize power, humanity simply withdrew. This was perhaps the most terrifying realization of all. They had not fought for dominance. They had not waged war to rule. They had torn down an empire not for conquest, but to make a statement, one that was now burned into the hearts of every remaining civilization. Humanity was not to be provoked. Yet their departure did not mean the galaxy was free from their influence. Their presence was felt in ways far more profound than occupation. Trade routes that had once been controlled by the Council were now open and uncontrolled. Planets that had once lived in fear of taxation and exploitation found themselves independent for the first time in history. The power vacuum left in humanity's wake became an opportunity for change, and those willing to seize it found themselves in a galaxy transformed. Some former Council species attempted to reorganize, to restore the order that had once existed. They formed coalitions, temporary alliances meant to re-establish control. But their efforts were fragile, built on the fear that humanity would return at the first sign of aggression. None dared to challenge them. None even spoke of war. But even as governments scrambled for stability, something else was happening, something no one had expected. Humanity's victory had done more than topple an empire. It had inspired those who had once believed resistance was impossible. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had lived under the Council's rule for generations began to rise. Not in war, not in rebellion, but in ambition. For the first time, species that had been trapped under the weight of a galactic hierarchy saw a path forward. Without the Council's restrictions, advancements in technology surged. Without their imposed limitations, exploration expanded beyond what had ever been possible. New ideas, once suppressed for fear of breaking the established order, flourished in ways no one had predicted. The galaxy had not just been freed from the Council. It had been set in motion. But while others looked outward, Wondering what the future held, humanity remained as elusive as ever. Their war fleets returned to Sol, their presence fading as quickly as it had appeared. They did not seek alliances, did not offer guidance, did not attempt to mold the galaxy in their image. They had never been conquerors. They had been something far more dangerous. They had been a warning. A warning that no species, no empire, no force in the galaxy was beyond consequence. A warning that the assumption of superiority was the first step toward downfall. A warning that power alone was not enough to secure dominance. And while humanity disappeared from the galactic stage, their legend did not. Stories of their war spread to every world, whispered in hushed voices and spoken in awe. Some called them monsters, destroyers who had wiped out an empire without remorse. Others called them liberators, a force that had unknowingly freed the galaxy from tyranny. But there was one truth that no one could deny. The Council had demanded surrender. Humanity had answered. And the galaxy would never be the same again,